SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
A historic moment is unfolding right before your eyes, and we are here to help you witness it all. This is SABC News. We are coming to you live from Nasrec Expo Center in the south of Johannesburg, the G20 Leaders Summit underway. And historic in many ways as well, in the sense that a couple of minutes ago, literally half an hour ago or thereabouts, President Cyril Ramaphosa, at the end of his opening speech, making the announcement that a G20 Leaders Summit declaration has been concluded and reached and agreed by overwhelming consensus is the word, the words that he was using. Since then, we've gone on to have a confirmation from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation that that is indeed the case. The announcement itself coming at the start of what should have been a closed session, but so swift was President Ramaphosa's movement from the open part of his speech to the closed part of his speech, such that by the time we were told to move out of that room with the cameras, the horse had already bolted in that announcement had come through. In making that announcement, President Ramaphosa, alluding to a quote by Pliny the Elder, a Roman philosopher and writer, that says, "Ex Africa semper aliquidi novi." Out of Africa, there's always something new. This is the something new, the reaching of a leaders' declaration right at the start of the summit. So whatever is being discussed at the moment, they are moving from a position of overwhelming consensus. I do need to mention something else on a lighter note before I speak to Denise Rudich from the G20 Research Group in London. I want to mention that earlier on, if you were watching, Sharon and I were talking as we saw the first glimpse of the room, the hall inside where the Leaders Summit is taking place. There was a bit of a joke about what was that structure at the top on the ceiling. It looked shaped as if it's a spaceship from Star Trek or something like that. Turns out Sharon and I, we really need new glasses. we really need new glasses, Sharon and I, because what that was is an image of the protea, the South African national flower. So that has been set up such that, in fact, I do need to keep quiet and take you to Vincent Magwenya, presidential spokesperson.
In trying to research that relationship, however, in this case, one must also give consideration that you have more than one country. It's the G20 plus the AU plus the EU. Therefore, we can't then bend the rules just for one country. We need to respect the countries who have been part of the process, who've worked tirelessly to make sure that this G20 is a success that it is now, even with the adoption of the declaration. And so we need to move forward. We cannot be held back by one country by its own whims. No.
Lastly, on this important news you've shared with us, the reaching consensus to adopt the summit declaration. I know and I've heard that America has tried behind the scenes to speak to other countries to try and get them to object to a joint declaration so that then there's no consensus since they're not in the room. But clearly they have failed. What do you think that message sends, particularly to America?
Clement, we need to appreciate that in any multilateral platform, whether it's the G20 or various UN fora, when countries participate in those platforms, they have a responsibility to themselves. They have a responsibility to the rest of the global community that they are part of. And therefore, those decisions are decisions that have to be well considered, both in each country's national interest, but also in its projection and in its relationship with the rest of the world. And so it was going to be very difficult for America to secure a boycott consensus, so to speak, when countries are mindful of their individual responsibilities to their citizens as well as to the rest of the world. So it was always going to be a difficult task. Secondly, we have to consider the enormous investment that countries have put behind this process. It didn't start last week. It didn't start this week. It's been a year-long process. Countries have been sending ministerial delegations. This declaration is a culmination of work coming from sector engagements, various working groups, various tracks, and so the countries weren't then going to abandon that at the very last minute as if work has not been done.
Vincent Magwenya, the spokesperson for the presidency, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Clement. Thank you.
Just one question from my side. Sorry, sir.
Just a quick one.
Sorry, I know that Mr.
Hi guys, okay.
Just one question from my
Okay, I'll
side.
come through.
Just a quick one.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's go this way. Right? Okay, so consensus has been made, has been reached.
Guys, let's not push. Let's not push.
The declaration has been adopted.
You're looking there at visuals of Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesperson, media swarming around him. It's a media scrum around Vincent Magwenya, who is now adding a bit more color and detail to what we heard from President Ramaphosa earlier on, how the consensus was reached that has now been announced in terms of the adoption of the declaration. We were just stabilizing the movement around there. Let me see if I can take you back so that we hear a bit more from him.
Of the global dialogue around economic development, as well as key issues such as climate, resilience, debt sustainability. These are issues that are key to our continent, and these are issues that have found expression in this declaration.
Mr. Magwenya, you mentioned that you've adopted the declaration and you've changed things this year. Does this mean that parts of the declaration that you're going to be discussing afterwards, what are those parts, or what are the major concerns in, that will be discussed after the adoption?
The declaration has been discussed extensively
Right.
by all countries, and hence it was adopted this morning. And so we're not going to go back and rediscuss it. We're moving forward now. What you have happening now behind closed doors is the affirmation of every element of that declaration by each country. It's also a sort of a forward projection, if you like, looking beyond the South Africa G20 and setting a clear path of issues and commitments that G20 countries must see through.
So there won't be any parts that a country or a leader could be...
No, adoption means,
There won't be...
adoption means
Okay.
it's adopted.
Yeah.
It can be renegotiated. We had the entire year of working towards this adoption. The past week has been quite intense. The Sherpas between Thursday, as of Thursday, they will go to their rooms at 5 o'clock in the morning to just shower and change and go back to the session. So they've been hard at work, and we'll really like to congratulate all Sherpas. Obviously, our own team, which has led the process quite gracefully, considerate of all views and allowing all countries to express themselves equally. But we also congratulate all our G20 member countries and partners who have shown a great spirit towards working towards consensus rather, and ensuring that this G20 is a success.
Vincent, was there any objection? Did anyone object to anything? Was there any concern? Because obviously there were deliberations and discussions, and there was an indication at some stage that there was almost a faction brewing inside. Has that been resolved? Did everyone agree?
Let's rather say there were debates. Not so much objections. There were debates over wording in certain areas. There were debates over how certain issues were reflected.
Could you tell us what those issues were?
Well, I can't go into the details, but you know, how issues were reflected, for example, on issues of climate and climate financing, gender issues and so on. There were debates around how those issues ought to be reflected and expressed in the declaration. So I won't characterize them as objections as such, but there were lengthy debates. There were issues that were debated in excess of 3 hours in one evening, and there were issues that were resolved fairly speedily because they were straightforward. And so what is important for us is the spirit that characterized these engagements and the exercise itself. The spirit was enormously positive, and the spirit was that of countries who are committed to their responsibility to their citizens as well as the rest of the world.
Was there no indication, was there no concern that the United States was not present in the room? The biggest economy in the world taking over presidency, did no one raise that as a concern?
Look, everyone noted that. Everyone could have not pretend as if that was not a reality. You'll recall that the U.S. is one of the leading originators of the G20. It is actually quite tragic that the U.S. Adopted the stance that it chose to adopt and boycott the summit, considering its historical role in the formation of the G20 and considering its responsibility to the world as the largest economy. Be that as it may, it's a short-term blip. The U.S. will take over the presidency of the G20 and will be able to engage on some of these issues in a constructive manner.
So what about countries that have...
What's the latest with regard to the U.S.? Are they still attending tomorrow?
I was hoping to get more questions about the declaration and move away from the U.S. No, they're not attending. We've made our position very clear. This is a breach of protocol, what they were suggesting. You cannot have a head of state handing over the presidency and the leadership of such an important premium or premier forum for macroeconomic issues and other related issues being handed over to a junior embassy official. I mean, it's a breach of protocol. It has never happened before, and it was never going to happen for the first time here in South Africa.
Do you think so let's talk about countries that have alliance with the United States of America. Did they make any...
Guys, let's not push. Take it easy.
Or speaking up for them?
No, there was no discussion about the U.S.'s absence. The discussion was fairly much focused on the substance of the declaration. That's what the discussions were focused on. Everybody knew by the time they got here earlier this week or even last week that the U.S. had chosen to boycott the summit. There was nothing that was going to be done further than that.
What does this do for the position? What does this do for the position of South Africa now that the U.S. is going to take over? How do you think you're going to move forward? And will South Africa still continue?
We're going to move forward very constructively. We're going to continue engaging with the U.S. as we speak. We're in the middle of trade negotiations with the U.S. And so we will move forward quite constructively. The G20 is about 85% of the world's GDP. The G20 is about 75% of world's trade. It's not about one country. So we will move forward very constructively. We're going to be part of the Troika with the US and the UK in determining the agenda going forward. And so we see that as a constructive, or rather as an opportunity for us to continue engaging constructively. We've always done that. We've always done that in South Africa. We've always sought to maintain friendly relations with all nations. We've always sought to be constructive in our engagements. And at no point has South Africa ever played an obstructive role. We don't boycott summits. We don't boycott meetings. We don't boycott countries. We engage, and so that's what we'll continue doing.
Apparently, you invited too many people who are not even part of the G20. What do you make of those comments?
No, what did we do? We made the G20 to be a lot more inclusive. We extended the scope of sectors within the ambit of the G20. What did that do? It elevated the profile of the G20. It gave a lot of space or room to voices that ordinarily would have not been part of the process. And that's what the world is crying out for. That let's hear those voices that have been voiceless for the longest time. Hence our theme, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. These are issues that are not a preserve of the few. These are issues that have an enormous impact on the rest of the world. And therefore it was important that we do that. As the president kind of said, with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, it's not a G100, it's a G million, and that's good. And that has created the kind of excitement that we now have on the G20.
Sorry, Mr. Magwenya, we heard rumors that
I just have one question outside of the declaration.
Sorry?
we heard that the summit will take action against the US.
No, there was no such. Yes.
One question outside of the declaration.
Sorry?
One question outside of the declaration.
Yes.
China and South Africa have deepened cooperation on climate change, green development, and other issues that feature are part of the G20.
Yes.
From your perspective, how can China and South Africa, including the rest of the continent, work together to safeguard the rights and interests of emerging economies through multilateral structures and bilateral structures?
Well, at a bilateral level, we have a very strong and very warm political and trade relationship with China. Secondly, we cooperate a lot in a number of multilateral platforms on such issues. And so it's only natural that you will have an affirmation of our alignment with China on these issues. China has become the second largest economy in the world. It's leading in various areas of technological advancement. It's increasing its investments here in South Africa, which is something that we welcome. The Chinese market is opening up more and more to Chinese goods and products, and the rest of the continent, by the way, is benefiting from that. And so what that statement says is that we're only going to strengthen our resolve to work closely with China in advancing a lot of these issues that are expressed in our declaration, or in the G20 declaration.
What does the declaration say about the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
I'm being pulled here. Just
I think, can we
What does the declaration mention about the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
So what the declaration on that one, that's an interesting question. So what the declaration does, it affirms the centrality of the UN Charter with respect to the peaceful resolution of conflicts and avoiding the use of force in resolving issues of dispute. And the declaration highlights in particular the four of the gravest conflicts in the world, namely the DRC, Sudan, Ukraine, and Palestine. And so if you're looking for the mention specifically of Ukraine, it's there. But that mention is in the context of an approach, rather, of how we deal with these conflicts, rather than the use of force, which, as we all know, never yields or amounts into anything constructive for all those involved.
What about Israel and Palestine? Any mention?
Well, as I said, Palestine is mentioned, and there's the affirmation of the UN Charter, which is something important to note, that the G20 never sees itself outside of the multilateralism of the United Nations. And so the declaration affirms that the UN Charter remains the sort of central guiding point, along with international law, in which we ought to look at or approach issues of dispute and avoid the use of force and commit ourselves to peaceful resolution of conflicts.
Vincent,
Guys,
what
thank
about
you so much.
gender-based violence?
I'll come back.
All right, you've just witnessed a media scrum there. That's how these things actually play out. It's the adrenaline pumping for every journalist. You are looking for your question to be answered, to be able to report back to your audiences the levels of detail. It has just come out that there's been a declaration, but all of us are hungry for more detail. So yes, agreement, but what's in this agreement? That's why Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesperson, was being swarmed in the manner that you've witnessed in the last 10 or so minutes by those journalists from around the world, really.